A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Stave 1. Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole friend, his sole mourner. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm about to relate. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood for years afterward, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the firm would call Scrooge Scrooge and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted, hand at the grindstone Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. External heat and cold had little influence on him. No warmth could warm Scrooge. No wintry weather chill him. Nobody ever stopped on the street with gladsome looks to say, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked. To edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, upon Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy at his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting, foggy weather. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who sat in a little dismal cell beyond, a sort of tank, and was copying letters. "A Merry Christmas, and God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "Christmas a humbug, Uncle? Oh, you don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do, out upon Merry Christmas. If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." "Uncle." "Nephew, keep Christmas in your own way. Let me keep it in mine." "Keep it, but you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone then. Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you." There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas among the rest, but I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come around, as the only time of year when men and women seem to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good. And I say, God bless it. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Why did you get married? Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love, growled Scrooge, as if that were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. "Good afternoon." "Nay, Uncle, but you never used that as an excuse to not see me before it happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?" "Good afternoon." "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why can not we be friends?" "Good afternoon." "I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute, but I will keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle." "Good afternoon." "And a Happy New Year." "Good afternoon." His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let two other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago, this very night. Oh, at this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking up a pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor, the destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir. There are no prisons. Oh, plenty of prisons, but a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and a means of warmth. We choose this time of year because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for? Nothing. You wish to remain anonymous? I wish to be left alone. I don't make merry at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help support the prisons and the workhouses. They cost enough. Those who are badly off must go there. Oh, many can't go there. Many would rather die. Oh, if they'd rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. It's not my business. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself and in a more facetious temper than was usual with him. The cold became intense, foggier yet, and colder, piercing, searching, biting cold. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool, tacitly admitted to the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose. Oh, if it's quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you would think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. Yes, sir. And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work. Oh, it's only once a year, sir. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning. The clerk promised he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt. Scrooge went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. Now it is a fact that there is nothing particular at all about the knocker of the door to his house, except that it was very large. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face! It was not angry or ferocious, but it looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up upon his ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixedly at the phenomenon, it was a knocker again. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for its being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to make sure that all was right. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in, double-locked himself in, which is not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers, and put on his nightcap and sat down before the very low fire to take his gruel. As he threw his head back in the chair, Scrooge heard a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight toward his door. It came on through the heavy door, and a specter passed into the room before his eyes. The same face, the very same, Marley's. Though he looked the phantom through and through it and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence on his death-cold eyes, he was still incredulous and fought against his senses. How now? What do you want with me? Much. Marley's voice, no doubt about it. Who are you? Ask me who I was. Who were you then? In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down? I can. Do it then. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. Mercy, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? Man of the worldly mind, do you believe in me or not? I do. I must. You are fettered. Tell me why. I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was as full and heavy as long as this 7 years ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain. Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in an expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. I cannot tell you all I would. My spirits never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me! In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob. Business! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Hear me. My time is nearly gone. I will, but don't be hard upon me, Jacob. Pray. I am here tonight to warn you that you have a chance yet and a hope of escaping my fate. A chance and a hope of my procuring Ebenezer. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Is this the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow night, when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night, when the last stroke of 12 ceases to vibrate. Look to see me no more. And look that for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us. It walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised a little so that when the specter reached it, it was wide open, and left. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, and he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. Scrooge tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable. And being, from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or his dull conversation with the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed, without undressing, and fell asleep on the instant. Stave 2, the first of the 3 ghosts. When Scrooge awoke, the chimes of a neighboring church struck 4 quarters, so he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell tolled with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge found himself face to face with an unearthly visitor who had drawn them. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as an old man. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold me? I am. Who and what are you? I am the ghost of Christmas past. Long past? No, your past. Scrooge then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. Your welfare, your reclamation. Take heed. It put out its strong hand as it spoke and clasped him gently by the arm. Rise and walk with me. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose. They passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either side. Good heavens, I was bred in this place. I was a boy here. You recollect the way? Said the spirit. Remember it, I could walk it blindfolded. Strange to have forgotten it for so many years, observed the ghost. Let us go on. Why did Scrooge's cold eye glisten? Why was he filled with gladness? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas, what good had it ever done him? The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it! I was apprenticed here. They went in. At the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig, sitting behind such a high desk, Scrooge cried with great excitement, Why, it's old Fezziwig, bless his heart, it's Fezziwig, alive again. Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, Yo-ho there, Ebenezer, Dick. Scrooge's former self, now a young man, came briskly and accompanied by his fellow prentice. Oh, Dick Williams, to be sure, said Scrooge. Bless me, yes, there he is. Yo-ho, my boy, said Fezziwig. No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Hilly-ho, clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Clear away. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away. With old Fezziwig looking on, it was done in a minute. The warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. And in came 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers, whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. There were dances. Away they went, 20 couple at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again. There were forfeits, and there were more dances, and there were cake, and there were mince pies. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 apprentices, they did the same to them. And thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. A small matter, said the ghost, to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. Small, said Scrooge. Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise? Oh, it isn't that. It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our services light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. He felt the Spirit's glance and stopped. What's the matter? Nothing in particular. Something, I think. No, I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all. His former self turned down the lamps, and as he gave utterance to the wish, then Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. My time grows short. Quick! This was not addressed to Scrooge, or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect, for Scrooge again saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had taken root. Where the shadow of the growing tree would fall, he was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light that shone out from the ghost of Christmas past. It matters little, she said softly. To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has displaced you? A golden one. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion gain engrosses you, have I not? What then? Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed toward you, am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man. I was a boy. I can release you. Have I ever sought release? In words, no. Never. In what then? In a changed spirit, a changed nature, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can I even believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? No. And I release you. May you be happy in the life you have chosen. She left him and they parted. Spirit, said Scrooge, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? I told you that these were shadows of the things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me. Remove me. I cannot bear it. Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer. Scrooge was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and in further of being in his own bedroom and hardly having time to reel to bed, he sank into a heavy sleep. Stage 3, the second of the three spirits. Awaking in the middle of a prodigious, tough snore, sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He established a sharp lookout all around the bed, for he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Now, being prepared for anything, almost, he was not by any means prepared for nothing. He lay upon his bed, and the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, on further tracing it, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called him by name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. In easy state upon his couch there sat a giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and it held it up high, high up, to shine its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. Come in, and know me, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. You have never seen the like of me before. Never, spirit. Conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion. I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch my robe. Scrooge did as he was told and held fast. All vanished instantly. The room, the fire, all its contents, and they went on invisible, straight to Scrooge's clerk. The spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinkling of his torch. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, and she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and now the two smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that they, outside the baker's, had smelt the goose and known it for their own. Whatever's got your precious father, then, said Mrs. Cratchit, and your brother, Tiny Tim. And Martha was late last Christmas Day by half an hour. Here's Martha, mother, cried the two young Cratchits. Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha. Why, bless your heart. Alive, my dear, how late you are. Oh, we had a good deal of work to finish up last night and had to clear away this morning, mother. Well, never mind. So long as you are come, sit ye down by the fire, my dear, and have a warm. Lord bless ye. No, no, there's Father coming, cried the two young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. Hide, Martha, hide! So Martha hid herself, and in came Bob, the father, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas, for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch. Why, where's our Martha? Said Bob Cratchit, looking around. Oh, not coming. Not coming. Not coming upon Christmas Day. Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, even if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding sing in the copper. And how did little Tim behave? Oh, as good as gold, and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much, and he thinks the strangest things you ever heard. You know, he told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made the lame beggars walk and the blind men see. Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. At last the dinner was all done. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth, and Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas, my dears, God bless us," which the family all re-echoed. "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost, "in a poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered in the future, this child will die." "Oh, no, no, kind spirit. Say he will be spared." "If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other will find him here. What then, man? If he be like to die, he'd better do it and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. "Man, will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child." Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground, but he raised them speedily on hearing his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob. "I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed," cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "Oh, I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "What, my dear, the children? Christmas Day. Oh, it should be Christmas Day, I'm sure, when one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. Oh, you know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow. My dear, Christmas Day. I'll drink to his health for your sake and for the day, but not to his. Long life to him. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care tuppence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before, and by they had a little song about a lost child traveling in the snow from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice and sang it very well indeed. There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, but they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded and looked happier yet in the bright sparklings of the Spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially upon Tiny Tim until the last. Scrooge and the ghost were then in another place, a bright, dry, gleaming room. It was a great surprise to Scrooge to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's. Laughed Scrooge's nephew. When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, twisting his face into most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece, by married, laughed as heartily as he. And their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, roared out lustily. He said that Christmas was a humbug. As I live, he believed it too. Oh, more shame on him, Fred. Oh, he's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. Oh, I'm sure he's very rich, Fred. At least you always tell us so. Oh, what of that, my dear? His wealth is of no use to him. He don't do any good with it. He don't make himself comfortable with it.